So I'm just going to talk a little bit here about Albumist. Albumist is a jQuery plugin for putting discographies on a website or blog. And you get little thumbnails of the cover art and a grid, and you can define behaviors for clicking on them and getting tracks and large versions of the cover art or whatever you want to add onto that. And it's very easy to use. Interestingly, it is drawing that information from public, open, free databases. So you don't need to have any special database backend on your server. It's just a jQuery plugin, and you can tweak the experience merely at the JavaScript level if you wanted to add things like links to buy albums or something that you thought was particular to your site without all that effort of having to make the discography yourself. And this was motivated by trying to help the legendary Pink Dots website get built. They were a band that was started in 1980, and they have more than 40 albums, very prolific, and that's not even counting the B-sides and compilations and stuff like that. And so a new webmaster was taking over and wanting to build a new site and kind of inherited a bunch of text files that were actually PHP files, but they didn't speak to any database that had some of the discography information. And the question was, should that PHP be edited, or was there a better solution? And to me, the better solution was to get all the information into MusicBrainz and Freebase and get the album covers uploaded there. And then that way, the information is available for all other purposes, but then find a way to display it and customize it on the website so it looked good. And so here's an example. Let's just pick a band that I listened to a lot as a kid, say Depeche Mode. And you can see here it is just pulling unfiltered all the data for their albums that's in the database. And not everything has cover art uploaded yet. The major releases do. So you can go down here, for instance, and find Violator, but no one's uploaded some of the others. They could. Or you could filter them out and not show them if that's what you thought was better, or if that album represented something that wasn't important. And as I mentioned, this was for the legendary Pink Dots, so we've got a fair amount of data in there. Last couple aren't yet, and a couple of outliers here, but for the most part, the data's in there. So how easy is it to do this? Well, this particular sample is actually in the GitHub repository, and kind of walk through with a basic HTML instance. You can run this yourself. You don't need anything fancy. Just run the HTML and it should show you the discography even on your local machine. You need a couple of things. You're going to need the JavaScript code for it, of course, and then some CSS to lay out the table, which you can change. And if you want that modal dialog box you get when you click on an album, you need simplemodal.js, which is a plugin by Eric Martin. So somewhere in your page, you place a div, a little document element, and inside that div you can put whatever you want to be there as the discography is loading, and when it's done loading, it will replace that. So that could be an animated GIF, or in this case, just the text loading. And the actual instantiation is pretty typical for a jQuery plugin. You have your selector for whatever element it is that you want to turn into a discography, and then you invoke Albumist with some options. And these options here are just sort of ones that you would expect. Band ID. This is the Freebase ID of the band that you want the discography to be displayed for. You can specify the size you want, the edge size for the little thumbnails of the album in the grid. You can specify the size of the edge of the cover when you get the full-sized version in the dialog box. It automatically picks up on the width and then divides it up to however many albums you want per row. So that's how you tell it, what the size is going to be, but your CSS determines the actual size of the widget. And I gave a couple of examples of things that might be useful ways to think about how your band or your web page can augment or filter that experience. So for instance, to omit certain albums, maybe you want to omit the albums that don't have cover art. Maybe you want to omit an album that is miscategorized for some reason, or you don't want to see in that gallery. You can add links here as another example of having a special buy link where you can put a price and a link. And so that lets you do a call out where you are selling directly from your website using that public database as the engine for displaying the album information, which is kind of an interesting mashup. And I show that here. And see, I've omitted the albums that don't have cover art, although you could see the missing cover art as being a call to action to fans to add it. So that's something to think about as well. And as I had said, it is open source. It is on GitHub under Hostile Fork Albumist. When it was originally written in 2008, it was written to go into a Joomla 1.5 installation, and they had standardized on MooTools as a library. And you don't hear a lot about MooTools anymore. And in fact, the latest version of Joomla has deprecated it, and so they just basically aren't really supporting that for their plugins going forward. But so it was a good time in order to fix the plugin up, to go ahead and bite the bullet and rewrite it as jQuery, which has become the de facto standard. I think that if you look at the code, you'll find it's pretty clear, and that I hope that other people will be able to be the ones who extend and add to it and can get support for any of the questions they may have about it. So it shouldn't be too puzzling to anybody who's a jQuery and JavaScript coder in this day and age. I did something a little weird with the license. I used a Creative Commons license, in this case the Attribution Share Alike, which is kind of like a GPL sort of. And really it's more common to use something like an MIT license on a jQuery plugin these days. This is kind of specialized, and I really wanted to draw artists' attention to the existence of Creative Commons licenses, and it seemed like a pretty good fit in 2008. And I still think there's value in letting artists learn about it. So until somebody has a complaint and says, hey, Brian, can we do this in an MIT license, I'll say, well, let's keep it as Creative Commons license just for the educational value of that. And it really was about artist independence and expressing this technology knowledge to artists, because I believed that even without a high budget, it wasn't necessary to defer the identity or the marketing to Facebook or MySpace or any of these other people who would like to get between you and the fans, that you could actually have a good website that broke down the whole band history, and certainly with a band that has this much history going back to 1980 and a lot of collaborations and side projects, I felt it was important to get a lot of that old information archived in here and to get the discography on the site and to let them sell directly. And creating the site was an interesting exercise. If you look at the question of how to design something like this, starting from scratch and starting from nowhere, they're the design cliches that I kind of wanting to avoid the idea of a big pink site with a lot of dots, a little too literal. So the webmaster and I were talking about what we thought it should look like, and she felt that going through all the album covers, the one that she wanted to draw from to sort of inspire the design was the cover of the Crushed Velvet Apocalypse, and so that was the choice. So we started off with a design based on that, kind of playing some music and thinking about it. And so this idea of bringing in stonework and kind of aged, an aged church that came to mind. And so that became the focus, which then going on to another design inspiration was the cover for a book of poetry by Edward Caspell called Love in Loud Colors, which had this kind of stained glass look, and I thought that was a pretty good design to go from. So what we ended up with as a prototype looked a little bit like this, drawing some stone and throwing in some stained glass. There were some ideas like putting band members into the glass. That's kind of a lot of work, easier to maybe use something a little more abstract, which is what ended up happening. And for my part here on the design, I did the typography. It's a couple of different fonts that were then, the L and the P and the D are from a different font from the rest of it, and they're different weights, and to get it on a nice grid and look good. So it's one of my pieces of typography that I think came out pretty well. And so then we have the site. And the person who actually ended up making all the stonework theme, I never actually talked to them, so I don't even know their name. But I think they did a very nice job of putting together the theme. And certainly the website has all kinds of stuff on it, the interviews and the reviews. And if you haven't gotten a chance to check that out, you should, because I actually didn't really listen to their music until I got sucked into this project, and then I started looking into the interviews, and a lot of what they had to say was interesting to me. And especially in terms of this sort of freedom, they were encouraging people to, take cell phone videos of the concerts and put them on YouTube. Very much a grassroots kind of open-minded artists who I think are the kind of artists who deserve to not be shoehorned into having Facebook or MySpace or whoever take over the relationship between them and the fans. So that's what the site was about. That's what this tool is about, and I hope it can help some other artists as well who might want to do something similar, or even something along these lines, because you don't need a huge budget to make a website in this day and age. You can mix up pieces. You just need a couple of people who know what they're doing, and it can happen. So thanks for listening, and go check out albumist.hostlefork.com.